doctor that exhibit
Yes, sir, we did.
to eliminate the aspects that are, all right.
Yeah, we cut the top off.
Okay. For those of you out in the audience, make sure that your cell phone is either turned off or in the silent or vibrate mode.
With respect to Exhibit E, Your Honor, will I need to remove triple E into evidence again, now that it's been changed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Triple E will be admitted in evidence. I think I said that yesterday. Adrian, did you move the tag so it didn't get cut out? Okay, so. Okay. Yeah, we can do it in front of the record. And is there going to be an objection to it?
She'll have the same objection, even though it's better than the working for as far as evidence.
Yeah. Right, as I indicated, I think it would be helpful for the jurors to have that exhibit in evidence, given that we are way removed from the local area of Deltona. These folks don't really understand the geography of the area that's been discussed in the testimony. So I think it's, now if let me ask you something, are you going to have him mark that exhibit at any time?
Put actual physical
Triple E.
marks on it?
Yeah.
No, sir. No, we're going to talk about the distances last time.
Okay, all right.
John, if you're the president,
Thank you. All right, you may be seated. State, you may proceed with your direct examination.
Yes, sir.
While he's doing that, folks, I think a lot of you see me using my computer a lot. I take notes about what's going on with my computer. I don't want you to think I'm just surfing the net and whatnot. Occasionally, I'm the chief judge as well, so occasionally I'll get an emergency throughout the circuit and I'll have to respond to that fairly quickly. But that's the only things I use my computer while I'm up here. And also I look up jury instructions for you. Those are on the internet.
Okay, Judge, sorry for the delay.
remove triple E
Over the discussions that we've had, I'm going to go ahead and admit the exhibit. Like I said, we've had extensive discussions on it.
Good morning again. How are you?
Good morning. Not bad.
Yesterday afternoon, before the break, we were talking about some of the early timeline on October 22nd and 23rd, more particularly the morning of the 23rd. I want to revisit that for just a minute because you were unsure of one of the times.
Sure.
Louis Toledo was arrested at what time?
He was arrested at 11:54.
Okay, and he was transported from the scene at what time?
12:10.
And then what time was the car recovered in Lake Mary at the Publix?
It was recovered at 12:38.
Okay. Now, one of the other things that I'd like to talk with you about this morning is the distances between some of the locations in our case. We're all the way up in St. Augustine, so I'd like to spend a little time talking with you about physical location and drive time, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. Judge, could we have access to the screen, please? Investigator Ford, I'm showing you what's been marked states SSS for demonstrative purposes. 317 Covent Gardens, who resided there in 2013?
That was Yesenia Suarez, the two children, and Mr. Toledo.
Okay, and where was Tyshawn Jackson's house with respect to that particular pin drop?
He'd be the house just below it.
Okay, on the same side of the street, the brown roof?
Correct, with the brown roof.
And the Morales girls, they lived in the white house across, the white roof across the street?
Correct, the one with the two cars in the driveway there.
Now, I'd like to turn your attention to the next exhibit, which is kind of a blown-out view, states RRR. Tell us what we see here.
We see 317 Covent Gardens up in the top left corner there. It's more of a blown-out view that captures the neighborhood, and then you see Doyle Road right there that goes down to the 7-Eleven down in the bottom right-hand corner where Mr. Jackson walked in.
Is Doyle Road the kind of four-laned, angular, swooping road through the photograph?
Correct.
Is it a main thoroughfare in the city of Deltona?
It is.
Does it eventually hook up to I-4?
It connects to I-4 at one end and 415 on the other.
And if you go underneath I-4, does it eventually connect to 1792?
Correct, it does.
Now, what's the distance approximately between the 7-Eleven and 317 Covent Gardens?
It's approximately 0.2 of a mile.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to walk that distance?
I did.
Okay. What time did Tyshawn Jackson leave the 7-Eleven on the morning of October 23rd, 2013?
It was 8:08 a.m.
Okay. And when you walked that distance yourself, how long did it take you to walk from the 7-Eleven to roughly the defendant's house?
It took me 8 minutes and 30 seconds, walking at a normal pace. And obviously, I'm a little taller than Mr. Tyshawn, so.
Okay. And so it took you about 8.5 minutes to walk that distance.
Correct.
Tyshawn Jackson left at 8:08. And what time did his cell phone call to his girlfriend occur when he got home?
That was 8:19 a.m.
I'd like to move on to what's been marked as State's Exhibit TTT for demonstrative purposes. Tell us what we're looking at here in this photograph, sir.
Again, this is a little more blown out than the last one. You'll see on the left side towards the middle, you can see the 7-Eleven, then the pin drop for 317 Covent Gardens, and you see I-4 at the middle on the left there.
And what's the orientation of I-4 as it runs through this part of the state?
It's pretty much south-southwest.
Okay. If you proceed in a north-northeast direction, what's on the north-northeast end of I-4?
Eventually hit Daytona Beach.
Okay, and if you proceed south-southwest on I-4, do you eventually come to Orlando?
Correct.
I'll show you what's been marked as State's VVV for demonstrative purposes. It's also been marked as State's 72 for evidence. This is the Lake Mary Publix, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is this the location where the black Honda was found?
Yes, sir.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 76. What does this display show, sir?
That's the Lake Jenny apartment complex, and you'll see where the pin drop is there towards the upper, more towards the left, center left. That's where the dumpster was in the apartment complex.
Okay, so the pin drop is actually on the dumpster within that apartment complex?
Correct.
The next exhibit I'm going to show you is State's Exhibit XXX for demonstrative purposes. Yep. Pardon me. State's Exhibit WWW, 3 Ws for demonstrative purposes. Tell us what we see here, sir.
You'll see the pin drop in the middle. That's Mr. Lasante's where he was that I guess morning on Wilner Circle at the Town Center Apartments.
On what circle?
Wilner?
Wilner. That's where he was staying on the morning of October 23rd, 2013?
Correct.
And I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit XXX for identification and demonstrative purposes. Can you tell us what we see in this photograph, sir?
Sure. Towards the left side in the middle, you'll see the pin drop. It's marked Petco dumpster. That was another location where evidence was recovered.
Okay, and give us a greater sense of where this is. And
well, you see I-4 on the left side there. I mean, you don't know the names of the roads, but that's 417 Reinhardt Road. If any of y'all been in that area, it's a shopping center. It's got a bunch of retail stores in it. Petco. I want to say there's a World Market over there.
Is this in the general area of the mall in Seminole County?
Correct.
The one right out there, the big pink one out
Correct.
on
I think that's
I-4?
Seminole Mall there on the left side by the I-4.
And so this is a shopping area in the neighborhood of the Seminole Mall.
Correct.
I want to show you QQQ as it relates to this case. Could you tell us what we see here?
Sure. It's an even more blown out map that's encompassing everything we pretty much talked about between the 317 Covent Gardens, the 7-Eleven, Mr. Lasanta's residence, the Publix, and the Petco dumpster.
I'd like to discuss Exhibit 89 as well as QQQ when we talk about subjects. I'd also like to show you what's been marked as states 4 and 2. Do you recognize the photograph in the lower left of this exhibit?
I do.
What is this a photograph, or what is this photograph depicting?
That's the gauge cluster from Mr. Toledo's Saturn. In the photo, it captures the fuel gauge. To get the fuel gauge to register to see how much gas was in it, I had to turn the ignition to the run position. The gas gauge indicated there was approximately a quarter tank of fuel in it. One of the things that I noticed was you'll see the oil pressure lights on, the engine lights on, the battery lights on.
The same.
Okay. Sir, did you take this photograph?
Yes, I did.
When did you take this photograph?
It was approximately, I'd say, about a year after we collected the car.
During the time that the car was collected by the sheriff's office, and the time that you took this photograph, was the vehicle driven?
It was not driven.
Was any gas used or taken from that vehicle?
Nothing's been, it hasn't run since it was put on the tow truck and taken out to our evidence, which is a secure facility where it's stored.
This photograph fairly and substantially depicts the gauges as you saw them on that day.
Yes, it does.
Let's say we move forward to 4 axes and
Okay, any objection? All right, over the objection, the item will be admitted into evidence, okay?
Now, Investigator Investigator Ford, let's take a look at this overall map and talk about some of the drive times and distances between these marked locations, okay?
Sure.
How far is it from Luis Toledo's house in Deltona to the Publix in Lake Mary where the vehicle was dumped and recovered by law enforcement?
Sure. It was approximately 16.3 miles.
And did you have an opportunity to drive that distance?
I did, yes.
Did you drive it at the same time of day as it would have been driven on October 23rd, 2013?
I did.
Okay. And what was your drive time driving the speed limit? These records were provided on December 28th, 2015.
What item number, please?
I'm sorry, item number 99. These are the records of Jasenia Suarez, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in examining these records, did you did you note the account balance on October 23rd, 2013?
Roughly, yes.
Okay, and approximately what was it?
Right around, I want to say there's approximately $2,500 or so in checking and right around $3,000 in savings.
Okay, and between October 23rd, 2013, and the date that these records were provided, December 28th, 2015, did you discover any changes in the balance in any significant fashion?
There were a couple of things. I mean, nothing crazy. She had a last paycheck that was deposited that increased her account balance, as well as a tax return for that she got in 2014 for, it would be the 2013 tax year.
For the portion of the year that she worked?
Correct.
Any subtractions from the account, any expenses or purchases that were made after October 23rd, 2013?
The only subtractions were like maintenance fees and stuff like that, no purchases or anything.
Maintenance fees by the bank?
Correct.
Okay. Did you also see interest fees by the bank?
Correct.
So administrative operating expenses, but no actual expenditures from the account?
Correct.
In addition to looking at the financial records and credit reports of Ms. Suarez, what other investigative measures did you take to determine whether or not Ms. Suarez was still in existence beyond October 23rd, 2013?
Well, we did a lot of things. There was obviously a lot of like news media and stuff like that requesting information or contact. We also stayed in touch with their family, which was pretty extensive family. They communicated with us. They hadn't heard or seen anything. There was no contact with the family for like birthdays, Christmas, anything like that. In addition to that, we had extensive search that took place. They yielded nothing substantial. As far as like driver's license and stuff like that, there was no contact with law enforcement or any government agency. She and the kids were both listed in FCIC and CIC as missing.
What is that, and how does that occur?
It's FCIC is a local Florida database where, in this instance, we could enter somebody as a missing persons, and their information is flagged, like names, dates of birth, social security number, driver's license.
Fingerprints if they have them on record.
Fingerprints if we have them, stuff like that. And if anybody, law enforcement or government agency, comes in contact with that individual, it throws a flag up and lets that agency know they're in contact with somebody that's, and the same thing with NCIC. NCIC is basically the same thing. It's just a national system. But if somebody comes in contact with the government agency or law enforcement and their name is run for some reason, or a social security number or something, it'll throw a flag up and let that individual know they're in contact with somebody, and it'll alert us that somebody's been in contact with them.
Would that apply if somebody, say, got a new driver's license?
Correct.
Or if they re-enrolled into a school somewhere?
Transcripts would apply there, possibly.
How about if they got a passport?
Correct.
Or if they tried to leave the country or enter the country?
Sure.
How about if they filed a tax return and their social security number were used?
Yes, sir.
Essentially, is there anything within the government domain, if it includes a name, social security number, or date of birth, is there any activity that would not come back to your attention?
To the best of my knowledge, there's not. Again, that information would have to be run, the flag to come up. And
that would also include any time that somebody purchased a house or any contact with a government agency whatsoever, correct?
Again, to the best of my knowledge, I can't be 100% on buying a house, but.
Okay. In the past 4 years, has Volusia County Sheriff's Office received any information that Yesenia Suarez and her children are alive or have been reported as being seen by any individual on this planet?
Nothing credible.
Judge, I have no further questions at this point.
Do you want to reserve?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Investigator, you're still on the subpoena, so you'll need to remain until the cross-examination takes place. We're going to break his testimony, and you're going to call another witness.
At this time, the state calls Anthony Wilson.
Oh, sorry. Bill Wilson, Your Honor.
I jumped ahead. My apologies.
Who did you call? I'm sorry.
Investigator Bill Wilson. Wow.
I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir. Can you tell us your name, please?
My name is Deputy William Wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N.
Okay, and in what capacity are you currently employed, sir?
I am a Deputy Sheriff with the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. I am currently assigned to the Justice Center over in DeLand, where I am the bailiff for Judge Leah case.
And were you previously assigned to the crime scene investigation unit within the same agency?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And during your time in the crime scene investigation unit, were you activated or asked to participate in a search that occurred on October 24th, 2013?
Yes, I was.
Could you please tell us where you went and what you were looking for at that location?
I was directed to respond to the Seminole Town Center Marketplace. It's a shopping center off of Reinhardt Road over in Sanford.
Is that also near I-4 and the intersection of 417?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in that location, what specifically were you looking for?
I was directed to meet up with Investigator Chuck Lee from our major case unit behind the Petco store, which is one of the stores there in the shopping center.
And again, what was your focus when you got to that location?
Once I arrived, I was advised that there was a dumpster directly behind the store that possibly were some items that needed to be recovered from.
With respect to the dumpster, what exactly was your action?
The dumpster was basically full of empty boxes and other debris from the pet store, and all that had to be removed from the dumpster. Investigator Lee advised that the items we were looking for were basically at the bottom of the dumpster, so the dumpster was completely emptied out, and then the items that he was looking, that asked me to retrieve, were found in the bottom of the dumpster.
In anticipation of your testimony here today, did you review some photographs on a printed slide sheet as well as on a DVD?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to approach with what's been marked State's Exhibit 5U, 1 and 2, as well as State's Exhibit 5E. Without telling us what's on these items, can you tell us whether or not you recognize the photographs?
Yes, sir, I do.
That was with respect to 5E, can you show you 5U's, and ask you some questions about that as well. Do you recognize the photographs printed on 5U's Part 2?
Yes, sir.
Does it contain your signature as well?
Yes.
And does the disc also contain your markings of the date?
Yes, it does.
Do all of these photographs substantially and fairly represent the scene as you found it on October 24th, 2013?
Yes, they do.
But if there's no objection, say that you 5U's as well as 5U's and the evidence is taken out, the question about it.
Your Honor, that's the judge based on the next.
All right, over the objection that we have discussed off record, the items will be introduced into evidence.
Okay, Investigator Wilson, I'm going to direct your attention to 101, States 101, and show you the photograph on the television associated with photograph A. Could you describe what we're seeing here, please?
Yes, that is the dumpster that was located behind the Petco. And at that particular time, that was the way it was originally found when I first responded there.
And I believe that you said that you had to take out many of the boxes and containers that were on top of the items you were actually looking for?
Yes, sir. The items that were recovered were actually at the very bottom of the dumpster. So the dumpster was completely emptied out.
Okay. And tell us what we're seeing in photograph B.
Those are assortment of the items that were located at the bottom of the dumpster. Some of the items have been removed for photographing purposes from white plastic bags that they were located in.
Okay, and what exactly are we seeing in these photographs? What are these?
There is a vacuum cleaner with assorted accessories, several stuffed animals, and there was also some towel, and there was some bedding that was found as well.
And photograph C?
Photograph C includes an inflatable mattress that was also located at the bottom of the dumpster, and some, I believe it was some clothing that was also at the bottom of the dumpster.
Among the clothing, is that a black smock commonly associated with a barber, or what a barber might wear?
Yes, it was an apron, the type of apron that they'll put over you when you're having your hair cut.
Yeah.
Investigator, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit PP. Do you recognize that as the black smock that was taken from or the black barber that was taken from the dumpster on that particular day?
Look at the tag. Yes.
Do you recognize State's Exhibit RR and QQ as some of the other items that were taken from the dumpster on that particular day? These the items that we've been describing for the last few minutes that were retrieved from the dumpster on October 24th, 2013?
Yes, they are.
Judge, if there are no objections at this point, they would move PP, QQ, and RR into evidence of next.
Objections from the bench, Your Honor.
Items will be admitted into evidence.
Judge, with the court's permission, I have to publish 103 and 104 while they walk inside the court.
Hand them to the bailiff, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions for this witness.
All right, thank you. Any cross-examination?
You want the photograph? Yep. Left and right.
Good morning, Deputy.
Good morning.
Deputy, I just have a few questions for you, okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you responded to this dumpster, you didn't know anything about this case, did you?
No, sir.
And you were told to go there by Investigator Mott,
Yes, sir.
and you met Investigator Chuck Lee at the dumpster.
Yes, sir.
And Chuck Lee already was removing stuff or had removed items from the dumpster before you arrived?
I don't know if he had removed anything. He had told me that he had gone over and looked at the dumpster, and it appeared that what we were looking for was at the bottom.
So Chuck Lee was getting information that you did not have at this point about what to look for.
Yes,
So when you arrived, that's a pretty full dumpster, isn't it?
it is.
Now, at the bottom of the dumpster where all these items were located, it was full of, what, dog food, cat food, like a dirt substance, sand substance?
Cedar shavings. I have to admit it was one of the best smelling dumpsters I've ever been in, but
Okay.
it was actually relatively easy to clear out because it appeared that the stuff that was in it from the photograph had just recently been put in there.
But in all these boxes, everything were on top of that.
Yes, sir.
And the cedar shavings and everything probably from Petco, that was all on the bottom too?
That was below the boxes on top of the items that were removed. Yes, sir.
And you don't know what day garbage day is for this Petco dumpster, do you?
No, sir.
And while you were taking items out of the dumpster, you photographed them right there on the scene?
Yes, sir.
And how long were you there?
I would estimate maybe 2 hours.
And you had no other involvement in this case whatsoever?
No, sir.
No further questions?
Thank you. Any redirect?
Just real briefly, Judge.
Sir, was Investigator Lee part of the major case unit at the time that you worked with him there at the Petco
Yes, sir.
dumpster? Okay, so he was one of the homicide investigators working this case?
Yes, he was.
Okay. And you said he was receiving information from other people associated with the investigation, relaying it to you?
That's correct.
I just want to be sure that the photograph that we see here is how you found the dumpster when you arrived that particular day?
That is correct. When I showed up, the first thing I did was started photographing the overall area, and that was the initial photograph of the dumpster that I took upon my arrival.
These are pretty large, bulky items. Was it easy to see down in the dumpster or around them and see what was at the
Yes,
bottom?
there was a lot of space between the boxes.
Okay. You didn't pull up and find that Investigator Lee had half the items on the ground, did you?
No.
Okay. Could you see to the bottom and see that there were things below this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. May the witness be excused. State.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. All right, thank you. Say hello to Leah from me.
At this time, the state really does call Anthony Gorgon.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Anthony Gorgone. That's spelled Gorgone. I work at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the biology or DNA section.
And how long have you worked in the biology section at FDLE?
I was hired in March of 2006, so 11 and a half years now.
And can you tell us exactly what you do in that section?
My current position is I am one of 3 supervisors of the section. We're a section of about 37 people, and we're divided into 3 little groups, and I supervise a third of the section currently.
Okay. Do you also do lab work?
Well, not anymore. I do not. I was promoted to the supervisor position in December of 2013, so I've been in more of an administrative role overseeing the operations and the lab work of the section for almost 4 years now.
All right. Prior to that, did you do lab work?
Yes. When I was hired in March of 2006, I was hired in our entry-level position, the forensic technologist position. In that position, I learned how to screen items of evidence for the possible presence of body fluids that may contain DNA for forensic testing, like blood, semen, saliva. I was promoted to the crime lab analyst position in 2007. In that position, I performed DNA testing on actual cases, independent DNA testing. I performed casework for independent casework for about 5 years before being promoted to the supervisor position.
Can you just briefly outline your education and training as it relates to the field of DNA, biology, your work?
Yes, I have received a bachelor's of science from the University of Central Florida. I graduated back in 2004. It was in molecular and microbiology. Like I said, I started in FDLE in 2006. I trained for about 5 or 6 months for the forensic technologist position. The big training program was when I became a crime lab analyst to do independent DNA testing. That training program was a little over a year, about 13 months long. So a lot of that was background readings, the underlying science behind the testing, learning that, doing written and oral exams, and then about half of that was doing actual supervised casework, so doing actual casework under the supervision of a trained analyst.
Right. Can you approximate, if you're able to, approximately how many times during your career that you've actually tested items for the presence of DNA?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would be an estimate to know exactly how many, but I worked in my career about 650 to 700 cases in my career. So depending on how many samples, I would estimate somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 samples that I actually tested during my career.
And have you testified before as an expert witness in the field of forensic serology or DNA analysis?
Yes, I've testified about 45 times prior to today in 6 different counties in Central Florida.
Let's, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about what is DNA and sort of some background information so folks understand how this process works. Can you explain what exactly DNA is?
So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and It's essentially the blueprint for life. So it's an instruction manual that your body uses to make you. So it stores a lot of information. It codes for everything about you, everything from your physical characteristics, the way you look, your hair, your skin, your eye color, to the way your body works, like the ability to make the molecules that break down certain foods in your stomach. All that is coded in your DNA. So everybody receives half of their DNA from their mother and half of their DNA from their father. So, and your DNA stays the same your entire life. It's also found in almost every cell in your body contains a copy of your DNA, which is useful for forensics because you could easily leave behind your DNA in those cells when you bleed, leave blood, when you leave saliva, semen, even skin cells from touching items. You can leave behind copies of your DNA. So forensically, we could use the uniqueness of DNA for every person to look at identifying marks on that DNA and compare an unknown sample to a known sample collected from a person.
And I think you just sort of outlined this, because my next question would be what kind of types of biological materials that you can get DNA from. I think you mentioned blood, saliva, skin cells, semen, things like of that nature. Is that correct?
Yes, the main three are blood, semen, and saliva. Any body fluid is going to contain a lot of your cells and a lot of copies of your DNA. I mentioned skin cells. Every time you touch something, you're leaving behind skin cells, which contain your DNA as well. Hair as well potentially can contain your DNA enough to get for the DNA testing. Bone and tissue are other sources of DNA.
Okay. Now, is it possible to come in contact with an item and not leave your DNA?
Yes. As I said, you do leave behind skin cells every time you touch something, but there are a lot of different variables. Obviously, if you're wearing gloves or not wearing gloves, if the amount of time you touch something, if you touch something for a second and get up, I wouldn't expect maybe to find my DNA on this counter right here that I touched. But if you go and look at my cell phone that I touch every day, probably more than I should on a daily basis, that's going to contain a lot more of my skin cells, my phone, my pen in my office, my mouse that I use and my computer. All of those are going to contain a lot more of my DNA because I touch those on a regular basis. So depending on how vigorously you touch something, how often you wash your hands, all those factor into how much DNA you leave behind.
Thank you. I want to talk to you a little bit about some DNA testing that you did in this particular case. In October and November of 2013, were you assigned to conduct DNA testing on a number of items from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office in connection with an investigation involving individuals by the name of Yesenia Suarez, Michael Otto, and Talia Otto?
Yes.
Now, is it fair to say that you examined and tested a lot of items in this case?
I did.
And I don't know that we will talk about all of them today, but I would like to talk about a few of them. Before we do that, though, can you talk to us a little bit about what type of DNA testing did you perform in this particular case?
The type of DNA testing that I did, it's called short tandem repeat testing. It's every DNA lab in the country or even internationally is doing some form of short tandem repeat testing. And what it is I'm not looking at necessarily your genes in your DNA, not looking for anything that's coding for your eye color. It's not telling me how tall or some, ethnicity of someone. What I'm looking for are these random segments of DNA that vary from person to person. So I could use those for identification purposes, like I said, in an unknown blood stain found somewhere, and I can compare it with these identification marks to a sample collected from an individual. So I look at 15 different locations on the DNA molecule and generate what I call a DNA profile. So the results for your DNA at those 15 locations will be your DNA profile. So I can then match up an unknown DNA profile you find at a scene to any DNA profiles for known individuals associated with, potentially associated with that case.
You mentioned the 15 locations that you're looking for. Are those 15 locations also broken down themselves in terms of alleles at those locations? I know I used a term that not everybody really may understand, but so you understand what my question is.
Yes. So at each location, it's think of DNA as a long book or a big novel. I'm not interested in reading the entire novel because that contains everything about you. What I'm interested in is maybe 15 pages in that novel and looking at it. Each page or each location on the DNA. Like I said, you're going to receive half of your DNA from your mother and half of your DNA from your father. So at each of these 15 locations, I'm going to get two what we call alleles, or it's basically a number. So from one parent, you get one number. From another parent, you get the other number. So at each of these 15 locations, I'm going to see two numbers that associate with your DNA that's unique to you and may not be unique to, at each location, you may find different people that have the same DNA profile at that one location, but that's why we test many locations so we can see, be more discriminating.
Okay. Can you just give us sort of a step-by-step process when you're actually going to conduct DNA testing? Walk us through that step-by-step, what exactly it is you do.
So the first thing, obviously, to do would be to find potential DNA on this item. So we test many different kinds of items in the lab. Sometimes it's a cotton tip swab, like a Q-tip that's used to swab something. Sometimes it's an actual item, like a T-shirt or a part of a car or something like that. The first thing to do is actually screen the item for potential bodily fluids. So I'm looking visually for blood, or I do chemical tests to try to identify certain bodily fluids. Once I identify an actual stain or a source of DNA on the item, I collect that, put it in a small tube, and actually perform DNA testing on it. The first step is called extraction, where I'm taking all of your cells that are in that blood stain or whatever it is, and I'm breaking them apart using heat and chemicals and exposing that DNA molecule and washing away all the debris in the cells. After that, I use an instrument to quantify the DNA. It tells me about how much DNA I was able to recover from your sample of blood or whatever it is. After that, I do a process called amplification. So remember how I told you the DNA is like a long novel and I'm interested in just these 15 pages? So the amplification process actually amplifies. So I can take a small amount of DNA found potentially from some skin cells or some blood and amplify it, make Xerox copies of those 15 pages at those locations, make many, many copies so I can actually get enough DNA to read it and see what's going on there. After that, I use an instrument to separate the pieces of DNA by size to actually generate that DNA profile that I talked about, which is essentially a list of numbers. And I can use that list of numbers, compare it to compare the unknown profiles to the known profiles. And if I have a match or an inclusion between two profiles, I can do a statistical analysis to give a relevance to that match.
And can you also, are there certain quality control measures that you use to make sure that the testing that you do is accurate and there's no contamination and things of that nature?
Yes. There's an extensive quality assurance program at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. It starts with our accreditation. We are actually accredited. It's a voluntary program to enter into to have an outside agency come in and accredit our lab. We are accredited by the ASCLD lab. It's the American Society of Crime Lab Directors Lab Accreditation Board. We've been accredited since the year 2000. I'm sorry, I think it was 1990 was our first accreditation. They come in and look at all of our facilities, interview our people, they look at our procedures, they make sure everything meets a set of standards that they set forth. We also get audited. Every year we get audited internally by our own people, but every other year we need to have an external audit. For example, this year we had the FBI's lab come out and look at our lab. They look at our procedures. They compare everything we do to a set of standards to making sure that we're meeting a high set of standards as far as our testing, our controls, and everything we run in the lab.
Okay. What do you do personally as the lab technician who's doing the work to make sure that the testing is done accurately and there's no contamination?
Yeah, so part of the quality assurance program is our daily quality control. So every time I run a test, I have to run positive and negative controls. So, for example, when I run a DNA sample, through the process to try to generate a DNA profile, it's run alongside a negative control and a positive control. So negative control is just a tube of liquid with no DNA in it. So it needs to stay that way the entire process. So at the end of the process, I just still have a blank tube with no DNA in it. The same thing for a positive control. It's a known set of DNA from a known source, and that I need to get that end result needs to be the actual DNA profile that I'm supposed to obtain from that. So every step of the way, there's a lot of quality control steps to make sure that everything I'm doing is working the way it's supposed to work.
You disinfect your work area, wear gloves, mask?
Yes.
Only work on one item at a time?
Yes. So there's also, at the point where I'm actually looking at evidence, there's a lot of different procedures. So I only look at one piece of evidence at a time. So if I take a item, clean my area, put it down on a clean piece of butcher paper, examine that item, finish my testing, package it up, put it away, and work on the next item next after I disinfect my work area again. It's the same thing when I'm actually doing the DNA testing. I'm working with little tubes of liquid. I'm only allowed to have one tube open at a time. I have to limit the number of tubes that I'm working on at a time. I can't take 172 tubes and put it in front of me and start working on 172 tubes. I need to limit my sets of tubes to small amounts and only keep one open at a time.
Do you undergo proficiency testing?
Well, not anymore in my current position, but when I was a crime lab analyst, yes. All crime lab analysts are required to undergo proficiency testing at least twice a year. And what it is we get tests. We actually purchase tests from an outside company. And we get these tests in and we work it just like it is a normal case. We get our results and we send it back to the company. And they kind of grade it and see, did we get the right results, did we not get the right results? So as an analyst, I did that twice a year.
And did you always pass your proficiency test?
I never had any issues. I never failed a proficiency test, no.
Now, let's talk a bit, and I think you probably have already kind of explained this a little bit. When you receive an item of evidence into the lab and you test it and you find DNA from an unknown source, what is it that you need in order to say that DNA came from a specific individual?
Yes, I think some people forget sometimes that DNA is a comparative science. So I think you see on the drama TV shows sometimes they do DNA testing and 2 seconds later a picture of the guy pops up. So there's nothing in the testing that I do in the lab that tells me hair color, skin color, eye color. The only thing that I get to see is gender, potentially, so male or female. So what I need is when I get an unknown profile, I have to have something to compare it to. So we need what we call reference standards. They're swabs collected from the inside of someone's mouth. We call them a buccal swab. And those are tested just like all the other samples to generate a DNA profile, and that is the DNA profile from that person. So then I can take unknown samples and compare it to the sample from this person, this person, this person. Does it match? Does it not match? Do.
And how do you recognize it?
Well, they have my unique Florida Department of Law Enforcement case number and barcode label that was put on when it came into my lab. They also have my handwritten initials and the date they were examined on each package as well.
And are these 5 reference samples as you refer to them that you receive in the lab?
Yes.
And these are reference samples from referring to 95, Tyshawn Jackson, 94, Police Toledo, 93, Michael Bronson Auto, 92, Emilio Suarez, and 91, Felicia Perez?
Yes.
When you conducted your DNA testing on these buccal swabs, were you able to write down a DNA profile from each of them?
Yes, I was able to generate a complete DNA profile at all 15 of the locations I test, and I would use that DNA profile for comparison for each person.
All right. Now, you did not receive a buccal swab specifically from individuals identified as Yesenia Suarez, Talia Otto, or Michael Elijah Otto, correct?
Correct.
On occasion when you don't receive a primary reference swab are there other evidence that you might be able to use as a secondary standard?
Yes, so when a primary reference standard, a swab from someone's mouth or blood drawn from that person is not available, I would need what we call a secondary standard. So those would be things collected, like say from someone's house that are known to be used by that person and hopefully only that person, and may contain a source of their DNA. So good sources of secondary standards would be like clothing that they wear, toothbrushes, hairbrushes, stuff like that.
Now, once you're able, if you receive an item potentially to be used as a secondary standard, and you're able to actually identify a single source DNA profile from that item, are there some ways to confirm that the profile on that item actually came from that person?
Yes, I mean, sometimes there are not, but hopefully what you could do is I could do a paternity comparison to see if I get a profile from something and, you know, it's someone who is missing and we're not able to obtain a standard from that person. I get a profile from something. Again, I can see that it's a male profile or a female profile. I can't see whose profile that is. So hopefully what we can do is line up some kind of paternity comparison. If we know the biological mother and father of that person, I can do a comparison to see, okay, here's this profile I got from this item. Could it possibly be the child of the biological mother and biological father of this person? And if it is, I can then line it up that way and do a statistical comparison to how likely that is.
And that's because, again, I think as you explained before, a person gets their DNA from their father and their mother biologically.
Correct. So I could look at a DNA profile and every paternity comparison trio of mother, father, child, if you look at that child's profile, every number should come from one of those two. And if they have too many differences, then obviously it can't possibly be the child of those two people.
Okay. But if you can match those up, you can sort of reverse engineer that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you receive a number of items in this particular case to do testing on that potentially could serve as a secondary standard for Yesenia Suarez, Michael Elijah Otto, and Talia Otto. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it was more than just a small amount of items, correct?
No, there were a lot of items.
And not all of them were useful as a secondary standard. Is that correct?
Correct. When I test something as a potential secondary standard, ideally I need to see DNA from one person, one source. Unfortunately, DNA doesn't always work like that, especially when you're dealing with items like clothing or stuff that people touch, because you may touch that item, but other people possibly touch it too. And it's not just the last person's DNA that touched it that I would get. It's potentially everyone who's touched it. So if I get a DNA from multiple sources, or what I call a mixture of DNA, I can't then use that as a reference standard from that person if there's DNA from 2 or 3 people on that item. I don't know whose DNA is whose.
Now, out of the items that you did receive, you were able to really find at least one item that you were able to do secondary standard for Michael Elijah Otto.
Correct.
You may. Looking for a logical place to take a break in the next 15 minutes, okay?
Sir, I'm showing you what's already been entered into evidence as Safety Exhibit 11, 12, and 38. People tell me if you recognize those.
I do. They also contain my Florida Department of Law Enforcement barcode label, as well as my initials and the date that they were opened and examined.
Okay, and can you tell us what each one of them are, starting with Safety Exhibit 11? Is that one I could get?
State's Exhibit 11 is a a boy's star design toothbrush that was collected from the hall bathroom. That one is a blue motorized toothbrush, also from the hall bathroom. That would be a purple motorized toothbrush from the master bathroom.
These were items that you tested for purposes of secondary standard from the three individuals.
Correct.
Now, with regard, I want to start with, and let me get the. With regard to the purple motorized toothbrush from the master bathroom, which I believe is State's Exhibit 38, were you able to obtain a complete DNA profile from that item?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to determine if and I think you indicated that this is something you could do or could determine when you do your testing, were you able to determine whether or not the complete DNA profile you found from Exhibit 38 came from a male or female?
From a female individual.
And in order to determine whose DNA profile was on Exhibit number 38, the purple motorized toothbrush, what did you do?
So, may I refer to my report?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, based on the location of the item in the master bathroom and the fact that it was a female profile, I was hoping to have this as a potential secondary standard for Yesenia Suarez. So, I did a comparison to her biological mother and father, Felicia Perez and Emilio A. Suarez. And that profile from the toothbrush, the purple toothbrush, did match, or it was included as a potential child of those two individuals.
Now, and did you do, when you do the DNA testing and you make a conclusion such as that, is there a statistical calculation you also kind of go through to sort of highlight?
Inclusions, or in this case, an inclusion as a potential child of these two individuals, everything has to have a relevance or statistical relevance put to it, because not all matches or inclusions are equal. So I was able to, what I calculated was a reverse parentage index. It's essentially an odds ratio that determines two scenarios. One scenario is that this DNA profile is the child of these two individuals, and then other scenario is that this DNA profile is an unrelated individual, meaning is not the child. So it calculates a ratio of how much more likely one scenario is than the other. So my result for this calculation was that it was 6.4 trillion times more likely that this was the biological child of those two individuals.
Now, with regard to just to follow up on that, you were able, you from that point forward, you used the DNA profile from Exhibit 38 as the standard profile for Yesenia Suarez. Is that correct?
Yes, so I did establish that and use that as a comparison as her standard going forward.
All right. Now, with regard to State's Exhibit 11, which is identified as a boy's star design toothbrush, were you able to obtain a DNA profile from that item?
I was.
And was that also a complete profile?
Yes, it was, from a female individual.
And so I know you sort of went through the process with regard to the previous item. Did you go through the same process to determine exactly whose DNA profile was on the star design, the boy's star design toothbrush?
Yeah, so based on the information I was provided, which is basically that it was collected from the hall bathroom, which is where the children potentially keep their toothbrushes, I made a comparison to Talia Otto's biological mother and father. The biological mother would be Yesenia Suarez, which I've already established using the purple toothbrush as her profile, and then also Michael Bronson Otto as the biological father. So I did make that comparison to see if this toothbrush did line up, and it did line up. That profile was included as a potential offspring, the child of those two individuals. And the reverse parentage index, which again compares those two scenarios, it was 6.5 trillion times more likely that this profile was the biological offspring of those two individuals than an unrelated individual.
Okay. And so from that point forward, you used the DNA profile found on the Boys Star Design toothbrush as the standard for Talia Otto.
Yes.
Okay. And that was Talia. I know it says Boys Star, but you found a female DNA profile that you were able to determine belonged to Talia Otto.
Correct.
All right. And with regard to State's Exhibit 12, the blue motorized toothbrush from the hall bathroom, did you conduct DNA testing on that? And if so, were you able to get a DNA profile from it?
Yes, I obtained a complete DNA profile from a male individual from that toothbrush.
Right. And again, did you go through the same process you just outlined to determine whose DNA profile was found on that exhibit?
Yes, I made the same comparison for that one to the biological parents of Michael Elijah Otto. So his biological parents, Yesenia Suarez, which was the purple toothbrush, and Michael Bronson Otto. And the profile from this blue toothbrush was included as a potential offspring of those two individuals, and the reverse parentage index for that one, it was 44 trillion times more likely that that profile was the biological offspring as opposed to an unrelated individual.
Okay, and from that point forward, did you use the DNA profile from that item as the standard for Michael Elijah Otto?
Correct.
John, this may be a good time to...
All right, we're going to take our 15-minute break at this time. Roughly at 20 to 11, we'll return. Take them down there so I can get, Yes, sir. Do you need the court reporter or no? No. No. Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. And discuss some of the evidence you received from various scenes in our case and your testing that was done on them. Did you receive 4 swabs in this case identified as coming from a master closet? And that would be identified as master closets 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Yes, I did.
All right. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Showing you what's in our evidence, cases 16, 17, 18. Take a look at that and tell me if you recognize them.
I do. They have my initials, the date that they were examined, as well as the Florida Department of Law Enforcement barcode label.
And these 4 items that you just identified, those are the 4 items we just referenced as master closets 1 through 4?
Yes.
You got DNA testing from those items from the master closet door.
I did.
Now, did you conduct any type of testing before you did DNA testing?
Well, I was trying to identify any kind of biological fluid that might be on those swabs to potentially test for DNA. So I tested for the possible presence of blood due to red-brown staining found on those swabs, and all 4 of them tested positive for the chemical indications of blood being present.
All 4?
All 4.
And did you proceed further and conduct DNA testing on each of those 4 swabs from the master closet?
I did.
And what were the results of your testing?
So on 3 of the 4, which would be, I don't remember the state's exhibits, I'm sorry, but master closet 1, 2, and 3, I obtained a complete DNA profile from a female individual. So this completed all 15 locations. I compared it to the reference standards I had, and it matched the standard from Toledo Auto.
Okay. And you said that was master clauses 1, 2, and 3,
Correct.
which would have been State's Exhibit 15, 16, and 17. And you said that it was consistent with originating from a female?
Yes. Yes.
Three swabs that you identified?
Correct.
Now, you only indicated 3 out of the 4. What about the swab identified as master closet number 4?
For Master Closet 4, the result I got was it's what I call limited DNA results, so it's not enough to even consider it a profile. It's limited information, so it's less information than I can use for comparison. So I reported that out as not interpretable, meaning it was too limited and it was unsuitable to be compared to any reference standard for comparison.
But it still tested positive for the chemical indications for blood, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, did you also receive a number of swabs identified as swabs used to collect blood from master bathroom?
Yes, I did.
And were those identified specifically as master bath 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 13, 14, 17, 18, and 19? And forgive me if I went a little bit too fast for you, if you need me to repeat those.
Yeah, I want to make sure they're all here. Yes,
Okay,
those were all of them.
okay. Thank you. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Yes, it appears to be all of them. I do recognize the package from my initials and the date that they were examined.
And did you collect, DNA testing on
I did.
did you initially test them for the presence of blood?
I did.
And what were the results of that testing?
They were all positive for the chemical indications for the possible presence of blood.
And did you also conduct DNA testing on the swabs?
I did.
And what were the results of that test?
So, for 1, 3, 4, 7, 9, 17, 18, and 19, I got a complete DNA profile from a female individual that matched the DNA profile from Talia Otto. And I failed to mention it for the master closet 1, 2, and 3, but when I have a match like that and I have an unknown profile that matches a reference standard, I need to give a statistical relevance to that match. So it's a little different than the statistics that I talked about earlier with the paternity. What this is it's a statistic done on that profile from the blood. So what I'm doing is I'm looking to see how rare or common those different DNA types are in that profile using a population database. And I'm determining what is the chance that if I pull a random person and test that random person, that they would have this exact DNA profile. So what is the chance that someone would have this combination of different DNA types at these 15 locations? So the statistical analysis for the match would be the frequency of occurrence of that DNA profile from the blood would be found in 1 in 410 quintillion.
410 quintillion.
Yes.
So that's many more times the population of the entire world, correct?
Yes. A quintillion has 18 zeros.
And you said that was with regard to master bath 1, 3, 4, 7, 9, 17, 18, and 19?
Correct.
All right. What about master bath number 2?
So number 2, I was able to obtain a partial DNA profile. So what that means is I did not get complete information at all 15 locations. I actually got complete information at 14 of the 15, and partial information at the 15th location. So when I say partial, I mean maybe I got the one DNA type from the father, but not the mother at that one location. So I did receive information on all 15, it just wasn't complete. That partial DNA profile from Master Bathroom 2 matched the DNA profile from Talia Otto, and the statistical relevance for that match, so the frequency of occurrence of that profile from that blood would be 1 in 29 quintillion.
Again, still many more times the population of the world, correct?
Correct.
How about master bath number 6?
Master bath number 6 and number 14.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, overlooked 14.
Is that okay? Okay. So 6 and 14 actually also gave a partial DNA profile as well. So I got information at 15, however, it was not complete. It did match the DNA profile from Talia Otto as well. And the statistical analysis for that match would be a frequency of recurrence of 1 in 29 quintillion also.
Okay. And that calculation was the same as what you reported out at master bath number 2, is that correct?
Correct.
And then master bath, swab master bath number 5 and number 13.
So those two swabs also gave a complete DNA profile. So I was able to obtain information on all 15 locations. It did match the DNA profile from Talia Otto as well. And the statistical analysis for that one, I would expect it to occur statistically 1 in 410 quintillion.
So all of the profiles that you were able to identify from the swabs that we just went over all matched the DNA profile of Talia Otto, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you also, sir, receive a pair of Timberland boots for DNA testing?
I did.
Yeah, perfect.
You may.
I do. They both have my initials, the date that the package was opened and analyzed by myself.
These are the Timberland boots that you received for DNA testing?
Yes.
Now, I see that you have put on some clothes. Can you remove those boots from the package?
Both of them?
Yes, please. Sir, what did you do use them for testing?
So the first thing I want to do, like I said earlier, is try to screen them for any potential sources of DNA that I could maybe test and try to develop a DNA profile for.
Can we put the bag down so the viewer can see, please?
Put them down here?
Yeah, I just want to be sure that they're back.
Yeah. So the first thing I did was screen them for potential bodily fluid like blood. So obviously due to the darkness and color and they're rather dirty, it's hard to visually see any kind of red-brown staining on the shoe. So what I had to do is do what I call general rubbing. So that test that I performed for the possible chemical indications of blood, I use a piece of filter paper. It's a small white round piece of paper, and I'll rub an item like a swab or a shoe, and then I drop a series of 3 chemicals onto that piece of filter paper. And after the third chemical, if it turns a pink color immediately, that gives an indication that blood is present. So what I can do on an item, like a large item where I can't visually see potential blood stains, is do what I call general rubbings. I'll rub portions of the shoe and test it for blood. If it's negative, I move on to another portion of the shoe, and so on. And if I get a positive result on any of those general rubbings, I will try to narrow it down to try to find an individual stain or an area that is actually positive for blood.
Okay. And did you do that for both of those boots?
I did.
And when you conducted this sampling, as you just sort of described, with regard to the right boot, well, let me just back up and ask this question: How many areas on each of the boots did you sample?
The entire boot. I don't know how many different times I had to rub, like maybe this panel first and this panel, but the entirety of the testing covered the bottom, top, all the surfaces of the boot that I could actually rub with a piece of filter paper.
Okay, thank you. With regard to the right boot, did you, when you conducted that testing, did it give any chemical indication for the presence of blood?
No, it was negative for blood.
What about the left boot?
The left boot gave chemical indications for being positive for blood on, can I show?
Right. Speak loud, though.
I was able to get a positive result of the testing of the boot's blood, essentially the entire whole of the boot. So I was not able to narrow it down. So what I did was the entire, instead of taking the sample of the entire boot, so I marked it off for area A, this side, area B, top, area C, which is the left side, and area D, which is the rubber whole part on the side. So I collected 4 samples of A, B, C, and D, and made separate samples for individual and of the 4 areas that we tested on the toe of the left boot, how many of those areas tested positive for the chemical indications of blood? They all did.
All 4?
Yes.
Did you then conduct DNA testing on those samples?
I did.
And what were the results of your DNA testing?
So for A and D, A was the right side of the boot, D was the sole on the left side. I got limited DNA results, meaning too limited information that I could use for comparison. The only thing I was able to tell from the DNA testing was on A, I could tell that at least one male individual had contributed some DNA to that sample.
You said that was area A.
Correct.
And while you were not able to get a DNA result due to the limited nature of your results, you say that it was consistent with originating from one male individual.
At least one male. That's all I could see, is at least one male left DNA on that portion of the sole.
And areas B and C, what were the results?
Areas B and C, I was able to generate a complete DNA profile from a female individual from both of those areas. In my comparison, I was able to match that DNA profile to Toledo, and the statistical calculate the frequency occurrence of that DNA profile would also be 1 in 410 quintillion.
So you said this was a complete profile that you found areas B and C?
Correct.
Can you again show which areas B and C?
So sample areas B and C. Sample I selected from this entire area here on the very toe of the boot, from this dotted line down to this dotted line down this entire left dotted line.
Those were areas that tested positive for the chemical indications of blood and matched Toledo's DNA sample. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the statistical calculations of that were several times more than the population of the world.
Correct.
Did you Did you conduct any DNA sample to determine the wear of the boots?
I did. So after I screened it for the possible presence of blood, I collected a swabbing of the inside of the boot, each boot separately, to potentially get any kind of touch DNA from the person who might have been wearing the boots.
And what were the results of that?
For the left boot, which is the one, this one over here with the potential stains on it, it was, I got what I call a complex mixture of DNA that's not suitable for comparison. So before I talked about, sometimes I have too limited information for comparison. Sometimes I have DNA from too many people to compare it. So a complex mixture is a mixture of DNA that usually indicates at least 3 people typically are part of the mixture, and I'm not able to, it's too much information for me to be able to compare to standards. So it was not suitable for comparison.
Okay.
The right boot was, the information I received from that was too limited to be able to compare it to anybody.
Is it often difficult to get wear DNA from shoes?
It can be. I mean, when you're talking about an item that you're wearing, we test every item of clothing, hats, shirts, pants, underwear, for potential wear. You'd like to have something that has a lot of skin contact, that like a shirt where you can swab the armpits, the collar, something that's typically touching your skin. Hats are very good. The brim of the hat's touching your forehead. With socks and shoes, sometimes it can be difficult because you're wearing socks, so maybe you don't have a lot of skin contact. You also, if you walk around in socks and then put your feet in, you're possibly collecting DNA from the ground that's just laying there on the ground, pieces of DNA, and then putting them in your shoes. So it's difficult to get a single DNA profile typically from socks or shoes. I'd say you have more success on like shirts and hats when you're talking about wearing stuff, and potentially identifying one DNA profile on something that was worn.
Did you also receive an item identified as a trunk mat from a Honda Accord?
I did.
And can you, may I approach and have some assistance, Judge, in moving these?
Should I put the boots away?
Yes. Just to back up, Mr. Gorgon, I think we talked about A, B, and C, that those areas of the boot. What about area D? What were your results on area D?
D gave the same result as A, so I kind of grouped them together. It was too limited for comparison, and I was not able to even tell if there was potential male or female DNA there.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, moving back to the black Honda Accord trunk mat. May I have the witness stand down, Your Honor?
May. Counsel, feel free to move about the courtroom.
Oh.
Take a look at this item of evidence that is already entered into evidence of Section 7. Some of you recognize it. Packages on the back. And did you receive this and conduct testing on it as well? Now, did I understand you to say in each of the 6 areas tested positive for the chemical indications of blood?
Yes.
And you took swabs from each of those 6 areas, which you identified on the exhibit on the trunk mat as area A, B, C, D, E, and F?
Correct.
And did you conduct DNA testing on each of those swabs from those 6 areas?
I did.
And what were the results of your testing?
So for areas A, B, and C, I was not able to generate any DNA results. So the result of my test was no DNA. So either the DNA there was too dilute or it was just in too bad a shape to able to get any kind of result from it. For area D, I was able to generate some DNA results. However, it was too limited information for me to be able to make a comparison. However, I was able to tell that at least one male had contributed to that DNA in the sample. For area E, I was able to generate a mixture of DNA. So I think I mentioned earlier, a mixture is when you have DNA from multiple people in the sample. Sometimes, like I said earlier, there's too much DNA and it's too complex, I can't do anything with it, I can't make any comparisons. It could be 3, 4, 5, 6, even more people in that sample. Sometimes I'm able to, what I call, resolve the mixture into its separate components. So maybe I have a mixture of DNA from 2 or 3 people, but one of those people, one person in the mixture of DNA contributed significantly more DNA from the mixture of DNA. So I'm able to actually separate that person's DNA profile from the rest of the mixture. In this specific sample, I was able to do that. I was able to resolve a complete DNA profile for what I call the major contributor. That would be the person who donated the most DNA to that sample. That major contributor's DNA profile, it was a complete profile from a female, and I was able to match it to Toledo. And again, the frequency occurrence statistical frequency for that profile, I'd expect to see it 1 in 410 quintillion. The rest of the DNA in that mixture for stain E was too limited and too limited for me to make any comparisons to the rest of the DNA in that mixture. So it was not interpretable. The last stain was stain F, or area F. Area F gave too limited results. I was not able to make any comparisons to the limited amount of DNA I obtained from area F.
Okay, going back to area E, where you said that you found a complete, when you resolved the mixture and were able to separate the major profile from the minor profiles, you said the major profile you were able to determine was a complete profile, correct?
Correct.
That means you had DNA information in all 15 of the locations that you looked for.
Correct.
And every allele at each of those locations.
Correct.
And you said that it was consistent with a female and it matched Talia Otto's DNA profile
Yes,
at a calculation greater than many times the population of the world.
correct. Statistically speaking, yes.
Did you also receive an item identified as a Clicker brand garage door opener?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Exhibit 77.
I do. The package has my initials and the date I examined it, as well as the FDLE case number.
This is the Clicker garage door opener that you received in the lab?
Yes, it is.
Did you conduct, well, just tell us what you did with safety exhibit 77.
Well, the first thing I did was examine it for the possible presence of blood. The same process where I rubbed a piece of filter paper and tested it all over the surface of that item. It was negative, so I was not able to locate any potential blood. I then swabbed. I collected a swabbing from the areas where you would touch to actually use it to open a garage. I collected swabbing from the buttons for any potential touch DNA that was left behind.
All right. And what did you do with the swab after you did that?
I performed DNA testing on that swab. I was able to obtain a complete DNA profile from a male individual. And my comparison to the standards with that DNA profile, I was able to match that DNA profile to Luis Toledo. And so I performed a statistical analysis for that match. So that profile from the garage door opener, I would expect the frequency occurrence, I would expect to see that profile in 1 in 3.9 sextillion individuals.
Sextillion.
Yes, that's 3 more zeros in the quintillion, so 21 zeros.
All right. Again, many, many, many more times the population of the world, correct?
Yes,
And it matched the defendant in this case, Luis Toledo.
correct,
And this was a single source profile.
correct,
His was the only profile you found on the garage door opener.
correct.
Did you also receive a large knife in a leather sheath?
I did.
May?
Showing you what's been entered into evidence at Safety Exhibit 71.
Yes, I do. It has my initials and the date that I opened this package and analyzed it.
And did you conduct DNA testing on the knife?
I did.
And what portions of the knife or the sheath, what portions did you actually test for DNA?
Well, the first thing I did was look for any possible blood evidence. So I was able to do the similar procedure that I explained, where I rubbed portions of the knife and the sheath, and the handle of the knife, the blade of the knife for potential blood. It was negative on all surfaces that I tested.
Okay. And again, the portions of the knife that how did you do the DNA testing for it?
So for the DNA testing, after it was negative for blood, I collected for any potential touch DNA that was on there. So I collected 1 swab or sample from the handle of the knife, and then 1 swab of sample from the blade of the knife. And then I also took a swab and swabbed the inside of the sheath. So for any DNA transfer on the inside of that sheath from it being put back into it.
Okay. And when you tested each of those swabs, what were the results of your test?
The results from all 3 of those swabs were very limited amount of DNA, and I was not able to make any comparisons. So it was too limited, not suitable for comparison. I was able to see gender markers on the swabs from the knife blade and knife handle, that or both were consistent with at least one male person being present.
Did you receive an item identified as a plastic football ring?
I did.
Right. And did you test it for the presence of blood?
I did.
And did it test negative or positive?
It was negative for possible presence of blood.
And did you go forward and conduct DNA testing on that item?
I did. The results, I did swab that item for any potential touch DNA, and the results, I obtained a complex mixture, so a mixture of probably at least 3 people. I was not able to make any comparisons due to the complexity of that mixture of DNA.
Did you receive an item identified as a translucent plastic sheet?
I did.
And what did you do with it?
I tested a translucent plastic sheet for the possible presence of blood, and it was negative.
And was that as far as you went with your testing?
For that item, I did not perform any DNA testing. However, I did find some hairs on that item. I looked at those hairs to see if they were potentially suitable to test for DNA. When I say suitable, all hair it contains DNA, but not necessarily suitable for the short tandem repeat testing that I do. What kind of hair is suitable for my testing is a hair that has scalp or root material. So I'm looking for more of a hair that was pulled out of the head, that was actively growing, as opposed to the hairs that you shed on a daily basis. We're constantly shedding hundreds of hairs on a daily basis. So when I find a hair that I might want to test for DNA, it's possibly good to test. I look at it under a microscope to see if it has a root and if it has any potential material to be tested. So the hairs I observed on that plastic sheet were not suitable to be tested. So I did not perform any DNA testing on that sheet of plastic.
Did you also receive an item identified as a black Van Heusen t-shirt?
I did.
Yes.
I do. The packaging and the item contain my initials and the date I examined them.
This is the black Van Heusen t-shirt that we were just identifying?
Yes.
What did you do with the black t-shirt?
So the first thing I did was look for any possible blood on the item, and it was negative, the possible presence of blood. So I collected a sample to see who possibly wore the shirt. So when I do that from a t-shirt, I'm collecting it from the inside surface, from the armpit area and the inside of the collar, because those are the portions of the shirt that are going to be most touching you, and potentially sweat. It helps transfer skin cells as well. So I tested the potential wearer DNA swab I collected from that shirt. I obtained a mixture of DNA from that item from multiple donors. It looked like at least 2 people's DNA was on that shirt. I was not able to resolve that, so I was not able to pick out any individual DNA profiles from that mixture. However, it was suitable enough for me to make comparisons to see if if I could exclude someone from the mixture. And what I mean by exclude is rule or eliminate their DNA profile as being part of that mixture. So I look at that mixture, that information that I have in the mixture, and I compare each DNA standard to the information in the mixture. And I see, could this person possibly be included in this mixture of DNA or excluded? And if I can exclude them and rule them out, then I report that that person is excluded.
And you were able to exclude a number of individuals in this particular case, correct?
Yes, so I compared to every DNA standard I had in the case, and I was not able to exclude, or I was not able to rule out the DNA from Luis Toledo from that item. I was able to exclude the DNA from Yesenia Suarez, from Talia Otto, from Michael Elijah Otto, from Felicia Perez, from Emily Suarez, Daisy Nieves, Wilfredo Nieves, Michael Bronson Otto, Emilio A. Suarez, and Tyshawn Jackson. I was able to eliminate or exclude all of those individuals.
Okay. And with regard, I know we mentioned a lot of names that we probably have not gone over prior to now. With the exception of Tyshawn Jackson, was your understanding that all the other DNA standards that you received were family members of Yesenia Suarez and the two children?
Correct.
Okay. And you were able to exclude all of them, as well as an individual by the name of Tyshawn Jackson. You were able to exclude every one of them.
Correct.
But you were not able to exclude the defendant, Luis Toledo, from the contributing to the mixture that you found on the Van Heusen T-shirt.
Correct.
Did you also receive an item identified as black Bugle Boy sweatpants?
I did.
You may.
I do recognize the package. It has my initials and the date it was examined, as well as the pants.
Am I correct that you may not have known that the garage door clicker had been found in the pants pockets of the is that correct?
I did not know that. They were separately packaged in separate bags, so I just touched each thing individually.
What did you do with the sweatpants?
I tested it first for the possible presence of blood, which gave me a negative result on all surfaces of the pants. I collected a swab to see who potentially wore the pants. So from the inside of the waistband and around the ankle, part that's touching your ankles around the bottom. I was able to obtain a mixture of DNA from that item. However, the mixture had too many donors and I was not able to resolve anything. Therefore, I determined that it was too complex to be compared to any of the standards.
All right. Were you able to make any determination regarding whether a male or female contributed to the mixture?
Yes, I was able to see that at least one male's DNA was present in that sample.
Now, did you also receive an item identified as a dirty mainstays washcloth?
I did.
And what did you do with that item?
I first tested it for the possible presence of blood, which tested negative. I also found a hair on this item, and when I looked at that hair under the microscope, it was suitable to attempt my short tandem repeat testing on. However, when I tested the hair, I performed the DNA testing on the hair, I was not able to generate any DNA results or see any results at any of the 15 locations.
Now, did you also receive a number of items, and I'll just kind of go through these since they're associated together, items identified as a rainbow canister vacuum, a vacuum hose, a rainbow floor cleaning attachment, a rain jet vacuum attachment with brush and attached bottle, and assorted vacuum attachments?
I did.
All right, and what did you do with those items?
The first thing I did on all of those items was look for the potential, look for any potential blood. So I swabbed every surface of those items, and they were all negative for blood. I also opened up the canister, which is like the actual place when you use the vacuum, everything that goes through the tubes ends up in that canister. There was water in there, dirty water. I opened that up and kind of took a swab to the water, and obviously not all the water goes in the swab. There's a lot of water, and a swab is this big, but tried to swish it around there as good as I could. and then let that swab dry and tested that swab for the potential possible presence of blood to see if there's any maybe trace amounts of blood in the water, and that was also negative.
Okay, and that also tested negative?
Yes, that was negative for blood.
All right. Now, with regard to the chemicals that you found inside of the vacuum canister, what observations did you make about the chemical, the liquid itself?
I don't know what chemicals were in that liquid and water, but I mean, it did smell like potential cleaning products, like from when I know just from personally using steam cleaners and stuff like that, so you know what a cleaning product smells like. So it had a smell like that. However, I can't tell you what was in that liquid.
Okay, and I may have jumped ahead of myself by using the word chemicals instead of liquid, but it had the smell of some type of chemical. You just can't say what kind.
Yeah, I have no idea.
All right. Now, do you recall the date that you actually conducted the test on this item?
I would have to look at my notes.
Please do. Thank you.
It looks like I examined the canister as well as all of the vacuum parts. I did it all on the same day, which was October 27th of 2013.
Okay, and that would have been 4 days after October the 23rd. Would you expect to find blood or DNA within a liquid that you indicated had the smell of maybe some type of chemical? Would you expect to find blood or DNA?
Overrule.
Would you expect to find blood or DNA within those chemicals after that amount of time?
I mean, I really can't say for sure. It's not something that, honestly, we have a lot of experience testing is water from inside a vacuum. I do know that if there was any blood found, if there are cleaning supplies like bleach or other cleaners with detergent, those items would break down DNA. Bleach destroys DNA, takes this nice long DNA molecule and chops it up into little pieces so that I can't get any results in my testing. Any cleaner with detergent would do the same kind of thing. It would degrade and destroy the DNA. So if I expect blood or any source of DNA to be in contact with the detergent for any long period of time, I wouldn't expect to be able to Kessel with a K. It gives a positive result. Horseradish did. A couple other fruits and vegetables can.
Now, the phrase fail to give chemical indications for blood, what does that mean?
That means the result of the test was negative. So I get no indication that blood was present on that item or swab or whatever it is I tested.
The phrase no stains of significance, what does that mean in your line of work at FDLE?
It means if I open something and I'm looking for, say, blood stains, and it's not something that's completely black like that, where I actually need to do a chemical test to identify it, say it's just a white piece of paper and I see no blood stains on it, I can say that is a report reporting that I visually examined the item and did not see any stains that were able to be tested for DNA testing.
And what about the phrase are excluded as a source of this DNA profile? What does that mean?
It means two things. It could mean that I had a single profile and I compared it to someone's reference standard and they did not match. So they are excluded as potentially donating that DNA. Or it could mean in reference to a mixture where I have multiple people's DNA, I compare the standard to that mixture of DNA and they're excluded as being a potential donor to that mixture.
And the phrase, due to the limited nature of the DNA results, this data is not interpretable.
Correct. That's when I get too limited information. It's not suitable to be compared to any of the reference standards in the case, so therefore it's not interpretable.
And in that case, you can't even conclude whether or not it's from a male or a female, correct?
Well, sometimes I can. So sometimes I could say that the gender marker when I say I test 15 locations, the gender marker is technically an extra, like a 16th location. However, it really just tells me if it's a male or a female, potentially, DNA. I don't use that for comparison for the match or the statistical analysis, anything like that. So I can potentially have too limited DNA information for the identification purposes, but there are times where I can still see, okay, there's a Y chromosome, which only a male has, so there has to be at least one male in this sample.
And there are times where you wouldn't get the Y chromosome.
Correct.
And one of the last ones is, due to the complexity of the mixture obtained, the data is not interpretable. This seems the opposite of due to the limited nature, correct?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. I have too much information, DNA from many donors. Like I said, at least 3, potentially 4, 5, 6 in some samples, and I can't even tell sometimes how many people, so it's too complex to be compared.
Now, with regard to your testing, you did 3 reports in this case, correct? And they were on December 5th, 2013, October 24, 2013, and January 9, 2014?
I believe I issued 4.
But those are the 3 main ones, I believe.
October 24th, 2013, December 5th, 2013, January 9th, 2014.
So just 3 reports.
Well, there's a 4th, but those are the 3 main ones. There's another one on January 31st of 2014.
So these reports here, let's talk about, and just kind of go through rather quickly, based on your terminology you just mentioned to the jury. With regard to the knife and the sheet, there was no blood on a knife and no blood on a sheet, correct?
Correct. Those were negative for blood.
And the DNA that was found was due to the limited nature of the DNA, the data is not interpretable.
Correct.
So that means we got some DNA, but it's of so little amount, you can't conclude anything of it.
Yes, the only thing, like I said, was on the handle and the blade, I was able to see that at least one potential male person was present.
Now, taking it one step further, you get these items, you're analyzing them. You don't know when any DNA was placed on any of these items, do you?
No, nothing in my test can tell me when a blood stain was deposited or when touch DNA was deposited. The best I can say is since the last time that item was cleaned or washed, depending on what it was.
Now, master bath number 16.
Yes.
Your results on that are the same as the DNA on the knife and sheet. Due to the limited nature of the DNA results, this data is insufficient for inclusion, but may be suitable for exclusion.
You said master bath 16?
Yes. You got some DNA on master bath 16.
That's the master bath 16? Which report are you referring to?
Okay.
There-
Actually, Anna, that's the next date witness on that one. So,
Okay. I did not test that.
You did not test in master bath 16.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you test in master closet 04? I believe you may have tested that one.
I did test that.
Okay. And, all right, good. So we're on the same page there. On that test, your conclusion was due to the limited nature of the DNA results, this data is not interpretable, correct?
Correct.
So that means you have some DNA, but it's of so little amount, you can't go any further than that.
Correct.
Now, you were given a lot of items to examine.
Yeah, there were a lot of items submitted.
And I think in your January 9th report, you went through 19 items. And if you want to pull out that report and take a look at that. January 19th, 2014, so the record's clear.
Yes.
In this report, you examined 19 items, and your results on page 2. And I guess the quickest way to go through this is just for me let me ask the first one this way. The swab from the hall bathroom tub knob did not give any indication for blood.
Correct.
The swab from the hall bathroom sink knob did not give any indication for blood.
Correct.
The swab from the hall bathroom tub drain did not give any indication for blood.
Correct.
The liquid contents of the hall bathroom sink drain, the trap, no blood.
Correct.
Swabs from the master bathroom floor tile grout, there were 4 swabs, no blood.
Correct.
Swabs from the master bathroom shower knobs, no blood.
Correct.
Swabs from the master bathroom tub knobs, no blood.
Correct.
Swabs from the master bathroom left sink knob, no blood.
Correct.
Swab from the master bathroom right sink knob, no blood.
Correct.
Swabs from the master bathroom tub drain, no blood.
Correct.
Liquid contents from the master bathroom right sink drain trap, 2 vials, no blood.
Correct.
And you already mentioned that there was no blood found in any of the vacuum hose parts or the vacuum itself.
Correct.
The black shower curtain liner, the black shower curtain without the liner from the master bathroom, no blood. That would be Exhibit 199.
Yes, I did test that. That was also negative for blood, yes.
The clear plastic shower curtain liner from a bottom of an exterior trash can had no blood on it.
Correct.
So all those items failed to give any indication for blood, correct?
Yes.
You also examined an exterior hose from outside the house, the nozzle, and also the hose valve, and there was no blood on those. In
In the
Exhibits
same-
120, 121?
Yes, well, so I examined swabs collected from those, not the actual
Right,
items.
exactly, the
But
swabs.
yes, they were both negative for blood.
Now, the area of the Honda Accord trunk mat, you found 6 areas that gave the indication for blood, but these 6 areas are all in a larger area, as you pointed out to the jury, kind of in the middle right, I guess.
Correct.
What I'm saying is these 6 areas that had blood on it were not from the entire trunk mat.
Correct.
And you said that on sample A, B, and C, there was no DNA.
Yes, no DNA at all from A, B, and C.
In D and F, it was not interpretable.
Correct, those were too limited and not
So it's
interpretable.
too limited for those. On E, you did find DNA, Taliato, but you said that was a mixture?
It was a mixture of multiple people's DNA that I was able to resolve what I call a major profile. That was where I was able to identify one single profile that was a higher level or donated more DNA than all the other DNA in that mixture. And that DNA profile did match Taliato.
Now, with regard to the Timberland boots, you swabbed the interior of each boot to try to get touch DNA.
Correct.
And I assume you swabbed all over the inside of these boots.
Yes, as much as I took a swab in there and swabbed everywhere I could inside the boot.
Because the more you can get on the Q-tip of the swab, the more hopefully you can get when you analyze it, correct?
Potentially, yes.
So you couldn't conclude that Mr. Toledo actually wore these boots.
No, I cannot.
And in fact, on the left boot, it was a mixture of at least 3 people.
You're correct, yes.
In the translucent plastic sheet, you examined no blood on that.
Correct. That was negative for blood.
Now, the state talked to you about the black Van Heusen T-shirt,
Yes.
and I'm going to ask you questions on your language on your report.
Okay.
You concluded that, well, first we know that no blood was found on the black Van Heusen T-shirt,
Correct. It was negative for chemical indications of blood.
and then you stated that due to the complexity of the mixture obtained, the data is insufficient.
Yes, it is insufficient for inclusion purposes. However, it was suitable for exclusion.
What does that mean, please?
What that means is I have a mixture. There's a good amount of DNA. I can't resolve the mixture. It's not suitable for me to include someone. In order to include someone, when I talked about earlier, when I have mixture of information and I compare each single profile, some mixtures I could potentially see, is this person included, meaning their information is present at all of the markers obtained, and I would include them to the mixture and give a potential statistical analysis of how many people in the population, statistically, I would expect to be included in that mixture. It gives a relevance. Some mixtures are so big, like 1 in 100 people would be included in that mixture. This was not suitable for me to perform statistical analysis on. Therefore, I could not include anyone in that mixture ever. However, I was able to just look at it and see, and determine, is there an absence of information of each person's profile? If there is, then I can exclude them, rule them out as potentially being a donor to that mixture.
Now, you testified earlier that Mr. Toledo could not be excluded from this item.
Yes, I couldn't rule out his DNA as being part of that mixture.
But also, he could not be included neither, correct?
Correct.
Explain that to the jury.
It means,
And that would be, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
Anna, it would be your, due to the complexity of the results obtained, Luis Toledo could neither be included nor excluded as a contributor.
Yeah, essentially what that means is I can't make a determination. So I couldn't rule him out, and I cannot include him because I cannot include anyone to that mixture ever, because I cannot perform a statistical analysis on that inclusion. So therefore, I was not able to reach either conclusion for that comparison.
The plastic football ring, no blood on that.
Correct, that was negative for blood.
The black Fila T-shirt, no blood on that. This would be on page 9.
Yes, there was a black Fila size large T-shirt that also failed to give any indications of blood.
The Panama Jack beach towel, no blood.
Correct, that towel was negative for blood as well.
The gray and red starter short size, no blood.
Correct, no blood on that.
The black Bugle Boy sweatpants, no blood.
Correct, negative for blood.
And the Dirty Mainstays washcloth, no blood.
Correct,
And there was a hair, but there was no DNA found from that hair.
correct.
You also examined three swabs from the trunk area of a Honda Accord.
Yes.
This would be Exhibit 88, A, B, and C.
Correct,
88A was from the trunk catch area
correct,
and no blood.
correct.
88B was an area around the trunk frame, no blood.
Correct, that was also negative for blood.
And 88C was a lower trunk rubber gasket and lip of the bumper. That also failed to give any indication for blood.
Yes, that was also negative.
Now, when you say you had a complete profile, you're recording complete results on all 15 locations.
Yes.
And when you have anything less than 15, it's a partial.
If I can consider it a profile, yes. If I can determine that it's DNA from one source, as opposed to like the limited DNA that I talked about earlier, what I can't determine is that bits and pieces of information from 1, 2 people, that's less than a profile even. So if I could determine that it came from one source, it's a DNA from a single person, but less than the 15 locations, then yes, I call that a partial DNA profile.
So you have complete profile, you have partial profile, then you have just a DNA that's not interpretable
Correct.
for at least two, when there's too much or too little.
Correct.
And then there's items that there is no DNA or you can't find any DNA.
Correct.
No further questions.
Thank you. Any
I'm sorry, Judge.
All right, folks, we're going to take our lunch break at this time. It'll be until 1:30. We'll come back over there to that other room on the second floor. The bailiff will come meet you there at some point in time. So you'll have to remain until 1:30, okay? You can have a lunch break now and then be back. Okay? All right, thank you.
All right.